Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Zinnie Harris's play The Duchess of Malfi. So this is an adaptation of the John Webster play of the same name from the Renaissance era, the Renaissance tragedy. One of my favorite Renaissance tragedies, in fact. Like, I would stack Duchess of Malfi up against any other Renaissance tragedy, and I think it holds its own. And I think that the revisions Harris has made in her adaptation are fantastic. So I really, really like this version. And actually, I was super, super lucky because I got to see this in the initial performance run at Edinburgh's Royal Lyceum Theatre in 2019. So, in addition to having read the text, I've actually gotten to see this play performed, which was absolutely amazing. So, the basic plot of Harris's Duchess of Malfi is the same as Webster's Duchess of Malfi. The Duchess, the widowed Duchess of Malfi, remarries against the very strong wishes of her brothers Ferdinand and the Cardinal. She marries for love, getting married to her steward, Antonio, basically, so he's a servant. They get married in secret, and they live together as man and wife in secret until she has children, until she gives birth. While this sort of secret marriage is going on, the Cardinal sends Bassola. So Bassola is actually, I think, one of the most fascinating figures in literature. Bassola is a murderer who was sort of brought up by the Cardinal and became his sort of hired villain. But he's also a kind of philosopher. Like, he thinks deeply, he's a sort of existentialist, he's philosophical about the nature of good and evil, about whether or not people are ethically bound by their decisions, whether or not there's some greater moral code beyond just immediate political power. So I think he's a fascinating figure. He's slightly less philosophical in Harris's version, which is sort of the one thing I'm not super, super pleased with, but it's a minor thing for me. So, the Cardinal sends Bassola, who has just gotten out of / escaped from basically prison. He was a slave on a galley. He was a rower. So the Cardinal sends him to Ferdinand, and Ferdinand sends Bassola to the Duchess to work as chief of her stables. But in reality, he's there as a spy for Ferdinand. Ferdinand is creepily obsessed with his sister's sexuality, and at several points in the play, both in Webster's version and in Harris's version, he imagines her having sex with different people. And he has these very vivid fantasies about it. And it's the first sort of sign that something is not really right with Ferdinand. So things go on for a while. The Duchess has her babies. She has twins. And this is the thing that confirms for Ferdinand that his sister is having sex. So he decides. The Duchess realizes that Ferdinand and the Cardinal are going to in some way attempt to punish her, so she sends Antonio and their son, Nico, away, and then she plans to join them, bringing their daughter, Isabella. But Ferdinand catches her, essentially. Ferdinand catches her and her daughter, locks her up for 4 years, and basically tortures her in an attempt to get her to break and to sort of admit that, I don't know, she was overcome by devilish lust or something like this, rather than actually being married to Antonio. And a lot of this torture actually consists of sort of psychological violence. And this is we have an interesting sort of modernization of this torture from the Webster version, because in the Webster version, it's a sort of weird thing where, like, they make waxworks figures of Antonio and her children dead, and then show her the waxworks figures to convince her that her family has died. In this, we have a modernization of that principle. The stage directions here say, a bit of video comes onto the screen behind her. The film is of Antonio and Nico, now aged 3 or 4, standing against a wall. Suddenly, we see them being shot with bullets and falling down dead. My cat's squalling outside. I don't know if you can hear that on the microphone. But we've got a modernization of this principle. And actually, in performance, this is a very invasive scene. The screen behind the Duchess was huge. Like, it took up a massive amount of the back wall of the Lyceum Theater. And we have this video playing to break the Duchess's will, to break her desire to live. Shortly after this, Bassola is sent in to execute/murder the Duchess, which he does. Initially, she's strangled, but she remains alive, so he drowns her in a bathtub. And this is another really interesting change, and a really interesting staging decision, because even though drowning is a bloodless death, the stage is covered in blood. I mean, the stage directions here say he wipes the water about himself, looks at the blood on his hands, notices the blood on the floor and the blood on the Duchess. He looks at the executioners. And basically, he asks them why she's bleeding, and they're like, she's not. But Bassola sees it, we see it, blood running down the back wall, a tidal wave of blood running down the stage toward the audience, blood running out of the bathtub where she was drowned, covering the Duchess, covering Bassola. And actually, interestingly enough, in the talkback after the show that I saw, one of the things that Harris and the actors talked about was the concern they had with that much blood on stage, because in rehearsal, it actually made it quite difficult for Bassola and the executioners and the other actors to stand up. Like, they were slipping in this blood, which is not really what you want when you're doing a show. So that's one really interesting staging component here, was the amount of blood symbolizing this violence that's engulfing not only the Duchess, but Bassola as well. And then the Duchess's maid Cariola is brought in and executed, then the body of her daughter, Isabella, is brought in. Then we have another really interesting shift. So we have a woman with a guitar, and let me find the cast list here. Because in the cast of characters, she's just listed as musician. So it's not entirely clear who this woman is. Is she an angel? Is she some sort of spirit? Is she God? Is she the playwright herself in some sort of meta-theatrical gesture, putting herself on stage? But basically, this woman comes on with a guitar. She sings a sort of folk song And then it says, she comes over to the Duchess and cleans off the blood from her. She gives her something warm to wear and dries the water. She does the same to Cariola and the little girl. The Duchess sits with her. So we have a resurrection of the Duchess and Cariola and Isabella. I'm going to come back to this because I think it's really, really interesting. So at this point, the Duchess is dead. Ferdinand is going full-on crazy, developing lycanthropy, which is something that he does in Webster's version and in Harris's version. He's digging up graves, thinking that he's a wolf. So they bring a doctor in. The cardinal brings a doctor in. In Harris's version, the primary medical tool that this doctor uses is a cattle prod. And actually, the cardinal uses this cattle prod and on Ferdinand several times as well. The sort of tragic climax of the play comes when the cardinal, basically, the cardinal and Ferdinand are in his office. The cardinal's lover, Julia, comes in, and he's basically raped her earlier in the show, and he's now essentially extorting sex from her. But he murders her quite brutally. Like, he essentially beats her to death in this scene. And then he uses the cattle prod on Ferdinand until Ferdinand passes out, at which point Basola and Antonio, who have now sort of joined forces, come in. The cardinal orders Basola to kill Antonio, but instead Basola gives Antonio the gun. Antonio then shoots the cardinal and kills him, then puts the gun down. Ferdinand awakens, accidentally shoots Antonio and shoots Basola in the leg before killing himself. Basola attempts to kill himself because he feels that everything that's occurred is essentially his fault, but he's unable to kill himself. And the play actually ends. I think this is a really interesting gesture. The Duchess's spirit essentially comes to Basola and asks him to stay alive and to take care of her son. It says, the Duchess steps behind Basola with a glass of milk. She puts it in his hand. The boy comes and takes the glass of milk and drinks it. The Duchess says, these wretched things will leave no more behind them than falling in a frost leaves a print in snow. As soon as the sun shines, it melts away. Basola says, we won't forget. The Duchess says, take my boy's hand. Basola says, please. The Duchess says, my boy's hand. In stage directions, he takes the boy's hand, and the Duchess says, and change it. So basically, this is not something that happens in the Webster version. So we leave on this glimmer of hope that Basola can, in some way, help build a better future for Nico. So that's a really interesting idea. A really, really interesting sort of end point. But one of the things that I think is most fascinating about what Harris has done is that resurrection of the Duchess, Cariola, and Isabella, because they then stay on stage the rest of the play. So in Webster's version, once the Duchess and her maid are killed, and actually we don't even see Isabella. We don't even see the children die. But once the Duchess and her maid are killed, they're gone. They're out of the play. There is a weird scene in Webster that Harris has a version of here, where Antonio sort of realizes the Duchess is dead because there's this sort of echo play where he'll ask to the world, are you dead? And the echo will come back, dead, dead. And that echo was probably spoken from off stage by the actor who played the Duchess in the original productions. Here we have the Duchess on stage. We have. Give me just a second. Christy Stewart in the original production run. But we have the actor who's playing the Duchess physically on stage, giving these echoes, engaging in this sort of conversation with Antonio. Ferdinand and the Cardinal also talk about seeing her spirit. And in the original version, this would have been a sort of Macbeth, is this a dagger I see before me, hallucination type thing. But here we actually have the physical body of the Duchess, of the actor playing the Duchess, still on stage. And so it's a much more, I think it's a direct sort of commentary on the prevalence of violence against women, and it's a sort of, it's a way of refusing to let the audience forget that the Duchess has in fact been brutally killed.